what keeps people
Correct.
in a state is education.
Correct.
Is healthcare.
Right.
Those are the things that people want.
Research is showing that people who get a college degree in Louisiana are leaving and taking their talents elsewhere.
I'm like, oh yeah, I live in New Orleans where everybody just goes to Catholic school, and they're like, excuse me, what?
We're not prioritizing education, and we're not taking care of our mothers, too.
We're not taking care of our mothers.
It's not a good look.
I think there's a lot more our legislature could be doing.
We are passing bills that are pushing out the very people we don't want to lose. We're passing bills like mandatory requirement of displaying the 10 Commandments in a classroom. Also, I guess the separation of church and state is optional now.
Abortion bans.
What?
Hey guys, real quick, before we get into it, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss out on any of the tea. Thanks. Hey, Charles.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing just dandy. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. We are at episode 5.
Wow, this is awesome.
I know. I can't believe already 5 episodes in.
And we're getting the hang of it, right?
I feel like we're rolling along. So today's topic is very interesting.
It is an interesting topic, isn't it?
It's population decline.
Population decline.
Here in Louisiana. So we're both people who are from here, but have lived elsewhere. Tell me what brought you back.
Man, I knew that question was coming. That's a good question. All right, I'll try my best to summarize this. So, I mentioned in a few episodes prior that Katrina, everything goes back to Katrina.
Yeah,
right?
all roads lead back to Katrina.
Everything goes back to Katrina. I had full intent of leaving and never coming back, and just the impact of the storm, I ended up enrolling at Tulane and got my degree from there. And after Tulane, I moved to Georgia and got my master's and lived for 2 years up there, and really got to know Atlanta. And it was up there where I realized, and I think you'll agree with me, people from here, there's something always brings us back.
Yeah.
There's something about
it's like an umbilical cord.
There's a
just
gravitational pull that this city exerts on us that is inexplicable. And it just is.
Yeah.
And I made the decision to return to New Orleans and get my PhD in urban studies, which logistically there's not many departments that have that type of program, so it kind of just worked out. But in the career and discipline I've chosen, New Orleans is a challenge, right? I could have taken the easy route and gone to a city that has all its stuff together, right? And all their ducks in order. But I have made the choice to come back here, right? And a lot of people don't make that choice, and I respect it. I think New Orleans is a city worth fighting for.
100%.
I think it's a city that is unique in many ways that I think a lot of people recognize and appreciate. And that leads itself to being an advocate for this city, both personally and professionally, right? So I made the decision to come back, and will I leave and go somewhere else? Who knows? But I will always have some type of pull to New Orleans.
100%.
Right.
It's worth
what about
fighting
you?
for.
Why are you you could have lived elsewhere and come back or not come back rather? So why did you?
Yeah, for sure. So I haven't talked a lot about my career so far on our podcast, but I work in healthcare. I'm a consultant. When I initially decided to go into consulting, I was working for a national firm and working all around the country, and wasn't exactly for me. So I ended up coming back here, and actually a lot of the work that I did early on in my career was with hospitals around Louisiana in really rural communities. And that for me just really emphasized the need to continue to invest in our communities.
Agreed.
While I grew up here in the New Orleans area, my family is originally from Acadiana. So, the other parts of Louisiana also really have my heart. And it's places that I want to see thrive. It's places that I think sometimes feel forgotten about, especially in light of, the size and reach of New Orleans. So I never want anywhere in Louisiana to feel forgotten about. And in subsequent years, I've lived in Boston. I do divide my time between here and Montreal, and they are, for two cities that share some commonalities in history, they are also very different. And I get asked the question a lot, like, well, which one do you like more? Or which one's better? Or which one do you want to stay in? And it's like, I feel so lucky that I'm in a position where I don't have to choose.
True.
Because it's hard.
You don't.
Montreal is a wonderful city. It has wonderful amenities, public transit, all of the things. But New Orleans has something that I think nowhere else in the world has, and it's the sense of community, the sense of roots and belonging that, as much as I've loved other cities I've lived in, nothing has ever felt like home in the way that this place does. Nothing feels like coming back to Louisiana.
It feels very authentic, right?
All
Authentic
the good,
culture.
all the bad. There's nothing that feels like coming back to Louisiana. And I just love when I bring friends from other places.
Me too.
And they get to, be immersed in the culture of New Orleans, in the culture of Acadiana, and really see how we live here. My family, we were just in Lafayette for Festival International last week, and we're walking on the street, and everybody says hi, and everybody speaks to you, and they're smiling, and the energy's good, and it's just like there's really and truly no place on the planet like Louisiana. So this is a place that I'm always going to come back to, and I'm also always going to fight for.
True. But as we know, a lot of people are not making that decision.
They're
In fact,
not.
they're making the opposite, and they are leaving.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on with our population.
So Louisiana is in the midst of what we call a population decline.
Yes.
So what that means is since the 2020 census recorded a loss in population between 2010 and 2020. Not very drastic, but a loss in population. And the reason it's important is that we are losing population when all the states around us are gaining population, right? So there's a huge population growth in what we call the Sun Belt region. So Texas and Georgia and Florida are really kind of the three. Even Alabama, right? Alabama is gaining population. It seems to be that Mississippi and Louisiana are, we're not gaining that population. This was hastened by the pandemic. So the pandemic, I'm talking 2020, 21, 22, 23, those 3 years consecutively revealed a steady erosion of population of people leaving the state for various reasons, which we'll get into. So that's concerning, right? As we're surrounded by states that are gaining population and we're losing population. So that's on the surface, it's not a good look.
Precisely.
Even worse and more specific than a population decline is when you lose a certain portion of the population, which is college-educated individuals. And we have a term for that called brain drain.
Yes.
If there's any cohort you don't want to lose or leave your state, is those with a college degree. Because they're getting the really good paying jobs, they're boosting, that middle class, the tax base. Research is showing that people who get a college degree in Louisiana are leaving and taking their talents elsewhere, primarily Texas, right? It's been happening, but it's speeding up.
Yeah.
And there's a whole host of reasons of why people are making that choice not to stay and invest in. This is not just a New Orleans issue, right? New Orleans is losing population, but Louisiana broadly. And there's very few parishes that are gaining population. St. Tammany's one.
Yeah.
I think was it Ascension Parish.
And out East Baton Rouge.
East Baton Rouge, right? So, but again, those are few and far between. North Louisiana losing population, right?
Yeah,
so it's really just South
Cameron Parish is the one that's been impacted the most by the decrease in population. And I would say that Lake Charles's proximity to Texas is probably not an accident, right? Like these things are certainly intertwined.
Absolutely not. So we're losing this population, but again, what's really concerning to politicians and developers is when you lose that college-educated level, the brain drain that I was referring to. So why don't you kind of share what are some of the reasons why people are leaving? Like, what are some of the variables at play here?
So, I mean,
there's a lot, right?
We talk a lot about Katrina, right? But that's not the only hurricane. We know in recent years we've had Laura and Ida that have both done devastating damage, not just to property, but people's ability to come back, even those who may want to. The cost of materials just to do repairs, the issues around insurance. I know people who are still fighting claims for Laura and Ida. And then the increases on those premiums after the fact. I can speak personally as a homeowner here in Louisiana of, my company, they did not renew my policy. They're like, we're leaving the market, And so it's a very scary position to be put in.
People are getting outpriced, quite literally.
Right. Like you cannot, I struggle to think about how people who are on a fixed income, elderly people who are, just getting by financially, how they're able to absorb this, because I know my homeowner's insurance has doubled just in the past 2 years. And that's not an insignificant amount. So when we talk about people being able to stay here and continuing to, maintain their homes and maintain their communities, that's a really big expense that most people in this state, particularly in the communities that end up impacted the worst by these hurricanes, they just can't sustain. And
make no mistake, it is becoming quite unsustainable.
Completely unsustainable.
Home insurance, flood insurance, you name it.
And so when you think, oh, well, I can migrate over west just a few hours and, I still can get good Cajun cooking because plenty of other people have migrated from Louisiana over to Texas. There's more job opportunities, and now I'm not that Texas doesn't have issues with hurricanes, but, I'm not in the same level of danger with regards to hurricanes and some of these natural disaster issues. I'm going to make that change, right? And so I definitely think that what we're looking at with regards to the expense in homeowners insurance and flood insurance is a huge factor in why a lot of people who've been impacted by hurricanes opt to just not return.
Agreed.
And it's unfortunate to see. I think there's a lot more our legislature could be doing around regulating how insurance companies are operating here in our state and keeping those prices down. I know that's a big topic
and just
in
to
the
put it
current
out there,
legislative
we had our
session.
We had our session episode already, but there are a lot of bills out there to help fix this system, but a lot of bills aren't necessarily doing that.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, right? The premise of a lot of these bills is that's the intent. If they pass and go into practice, is that intent really going to be what transpires?
Agreed.
And I think that is a huge factor for why people are departing Louisiana as a
So
whole.
actually, that feeds into another big point of why I think Louisiana is losing population, and it directly goes back to the legislator and politics, right? We are passing bills that are pushing out the very people we don't want to lose.
Precisely.
These very harsh social, cultural, conservative bills, that's the last thing that millennials, Gen Z, that's not going to have them move to Louisiana.
Right.
And I know you're on Twitter, Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, right?
I still call it Twitter. I don't care.
Every day I kind of do my scrolling, and I like to follow the commentary of the session or whatever. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed this. It's kind of funny to me, actually. In a flippant way, someone will repost a bill. Oh, yeah, this bill is what's keeping people in Louisiana.
Right.
A bill that's totally ridiculous and ludicrous. It's like our priorities are completely out of whack, right? We're not passing bills that encourage people to stay in Louisiana. We're passing bills that are only going to push people out of Louisiana.
Yeah.
Attacking LGBT is not going to keep people here. Attacking trans people is not going to keep people here. Right.
And I think a lot of these sort of, for lack of a better term, culture war type issues, a lot of people kind of think this is the hill to die on, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think also a lot of people kind of see this as the divide between New Orleans and the rest of Louisiana. But there's also so much more going on that we are seeing impact New Orleans and the other parts of Louisiana equally, right? So the rejection of the federal funds for meals, right?
That's not a good look.
That's not only is it not a good look, right? But we saw kind of that was a part of this quote unquote conservative agenda. But when many of our legislators went home to their communities where they're not in New Orleans, they're not in the big city, these are small rural communities that rely on these dollars to feed kids, they got that feedback of no, these dollars need to come here, right? And so I think you're actually starting to really see some of these things sort of pull away and really start to understand where the stuff that is sort of deemed a New Orleans issue, it's actually really a broadly more Louisiana issue and hurts our rural population significantly more than anyone in the city, and we can talk about population decline in New Orleans and the New Orleans metropolitan area because it is, I think, the third steepest decline nationally for a metropolitan area. But our rural communities are being impacted too, right? Louisiana is still an agricultural state, right? Crawfish farms, rice farms, all of these things are still here and are still producing. And these communities still need support, right? What are we doing to ensure that, there are laborers that are able to come into these communities and find houses to work in these factories, like to work on these farms. If we are creating policies that make it difficult for people to feed their children,
Right.
they're not going to want to live in this state.
And another related issue to the funding for the summer food program is how Louisiana is approaching education.
Yeah.
Right. So in Louisiana, we're consistently ranked 48th, 49th, 50th in education. It's a constant battle to keep our public school teachers, their pay on par with the Southern regional average, even funding public schools. So now we're seeing, again, we talked about this in a previous episode, but Louisiana essentially playing catch up with other conservative states just because we had that buffer with John Bell Edwards. We're now venturing into the educational savings accounts, right? ESAs,
right.
Which sends, again, a bad message that we're not prioritizing education in a state that is already bad on education. And that just creates a further impetus for people who value education to leave and go elsewhere, where they do value education, right? And what's so interesting about these things that are being passed through these committees and the legislatures, they know very well that we're losing population. And they know very well the research of why we're losing population. But they continue to push these policies that are antithetical to the very thing that they know.
Right.
And that's what's so frustrating.
There are decades of sociological research that says what keeps people in a state is education.
Correct.
Is healthcare.
Right.
Those are the things that people want. And those are the things that are, core tenets of building up communities, building up economies. And
having a growing and thriving population.
And we have seen proof that when you divest from education, it is going to create population decline. And that's exactly what we have seen happen, right? Reductions in our higher education appropriation. Now this move to shift public dollars to be utilized for private schooling, so essentially divesting from our public schools. We are moving this needle in
not giving
the wrong direction.
Teachers a pay raise, but calling it a stipend.
Instead, right.
Right?
I mean,
the optics are bad.
The optics are bad, and the results will be as well. And
Even
we know
worse.
this, right? We have seen enough research that this is well established what direction these sorts of policies will take a state and a community in. What we haven't really touched on as much, though, is health aspects of this, right?
Yeah.
Infant and maternal mortality rates in this state. We have a birth rate that is barely outpacing our death rate in this state, right? So our population decline is also not just related
It's not just the immigration and immigration, out-migration. It's
people
also birth and death
out-migrating,
rates.
right? Like, we aren't birthing babies in Louisiana at a rate enough to grow this population.
And we're not taking care of our mothers, too.
We're not taking care of our mothers. And that is a scary thing. We're not taking care of our mothers, and we're not taking care of our babies, because not only do we have a declining birth rate, but also for a state in the United States of America, in the developed world, our mortality
when you put it that
for
way,
infants and mothers are really, really shameful, And so as we look at those sorts of things, again, especially in this environment around abortion bans and restrictions on, reproductive medicine, how are we going to draw people into a state where, as a mother, as someone with young children, as a woman, you may not feel safe or that you can thrive?
I agree. And I think, we keep talking about this idea that, we started this episode with we've lived elsewhere, right? So we've seen how things can be. Well, there's smooth streets
Good
here.
and bad.
Wow. Oh, wow. They invest in their education here, right? And we acknowledge the troubles that Louisiana perpetually faces. Yes. I mean, these are things that we can always face over and over again. With the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. We keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result, and it's not working. And, to an extent, we try to emulate what Texas is doing, but that's really hard to compare Texas and Louisiana. You're comparing apples and oranges here. So I'm curious, we point out all the bad legislation. What would be good legislation to keep people here?
Ooh, that is a great question.
Like, what do you?
So certainly for me, one of the things that I think would really help is investing in public education in Louisiana. I think, in New Orleans, we sort of have this very weirdly accepted divide of like the public schools here just aren't good, so we just send all of our kids to private schools or parochial schools. And it's been that way for so long that I think people have just accepted that.
Oh, yeah, it's a norm.
Right, but like going other places, I'm like, not having community schools is like an anomaly.
Yep.
You know, when I talk to people, I'm like, oh yeah, I live in New Orleans where everybody just goes to Catholic school. And they're like, excuse me, what? Like, what do you mean everybody just goes to Catholic school, right? So I think like re-engineering that mindset around what it means to educate our kids. Because we can talk about education for higher education and at higher levels, but like really and truly, this starts in our preschools. This starts in our kindergartens.
Even before early childhood education.
Early childhood education and really investing in the minds and development of our youth. I think it's a lot easier to take care of those that we have here than try to attract new, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's start at home. And I think investment in education is so crucial and so important because it's the downstream, right? These are kids that with better education are going to make better decisions in life, right? That's going to impact teen pregnancy rates. That's going to impact things like our mortality rates around health, right? I have a better understanding of how to take care of myself because I got science education, right? You know, I think that education really is that really important pillar. What's really unfortunate and disappointing is I think that investment in public education is what's necessary. And right now what we're seeing happening in our legislature is that it's swinging in the way opposite direction.
And to make matters even worse, to give the people out there some examples of some really bad bills right now. So instead of doing what you just said, right, investing in early childhood, giving some permanent teacher pay raises, we're passing bills like mandatory requirement of displaying the 10 Commandments in the classroom.
Which
we have bigger priority.
Right.
What? That's our priority? Okay, cool. Also, I guess the separation of church and state is optional now, but that's another episode for another day. So cool. So, you know, that's being passed. You know, this complete assault on libraries and librarians and book bans.
Well, that at least...
So we're going the opposite route.
One of the library
None of that
bills
is going to keep
died.
people... You know what? You're right. Banning books, that's what's keeping me in Louisiana.
But
what?
that's what's
Come
so
on.
frustrating. Look, as a kid who... My prized possession as a child was my library card for the Opelousas Library because I could like walk from my grandmother's house and go and hang out all day. It's one of those things that it's so sad to see us divest from that sort of thing, right?
And attack them. Like vilify them.
These are the things that, you know, keep kids from running amok in the summer, right? Summer reading programs and, you know, a space to escape the heat of Louisiana in July, right? We should be encouraging kids.
Not disinvesting in that.
Right.
And then you wonder why we need a crime session.
Right. Yeah.
Come on.
I mean, those are the things that it's so disheartening to see because we know what works. We know what works, and it seems like we're getting this digging in.
So is it a lack of willpower, or is it just a blatant, like, we don't want to do? Like, I mean, it does make you think a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of this is by accident.
Mm-hmm. No, nothing ever is.
Put on my
It's
tinfoil
always
hat.
by design. Yeah,
I don't think any of this is by accident. We know that there are deliberate and intentional moves around trying to control narratives, trying to control people as an electorate. And the earlier you do that, right, the easier it is for you to condition adults and voters who believe certain things and act and vote in a certain way. So, you know, this isn't, I think, about making Louisiana better, right? I think it's about making your constituents more malleable, is the reality.
Which is interesting,
sad.
though, because, and I think you were kind of insinuating this earlier, I don't think that binary of like conservative liberal Louisiana is as stark as people think it is. I think there's fun fact, there are more registered Democrats in Louisiana, have been for decades, than there are Republicans. But we have this false illusion that it's a Republican-dominated state. It's actually not, right? Our turnout is low for elections. Yeah. So it paints this false narrative that it's a Republican state. There's more Democrats. But that Democrat, which is a whole other topic, right? The Democrat Party
we
rebuilding
could do a
itself.
whole episode on Democrats in Louisiana.
We wind up in a situation where people are voting against their self-interests when we know that we don't have to be this way. Louisiana has a very unique history of going blue when others did. We voted blue in the 90s for Clinton as president. We had a Democrat governor, Kathleen Blanco, female governor in the 2000s, John Bel Edwards. So it can be done. It's just, there's that pushback from the other end it's a small minority, but a very vocal and powerful minority.
Yeah, and I guess it veers a little off the express topic at hand, but I think that the cultural identity of being a Republican or a Democrat or being a conservative or a progressive is, in general, clouding everyone's
I agree.
judgment, right?
But it influences the policies that are being proposed.
It does.
And the bills.
But I think so often, that language just gets applied to things, and we're not actually having conversations about what does this bill mean, right?
Agreed.
What is the change we're actually trying to enact here? Mm-hmm. And I hope some of this dialogue and conversations we have, especially where we unpack some of this legislation, can add some of that color, whether you agree with us or not, but just to have some conversations about what is this bill's intent.
What is the intent?
What is it actually going to do if it were to pass in the condition that it's in? And what do we want to happen for our state? So I'm sure there are people that do legitimately believe the opposite of me, that putting these funds into the school savings accounts and allowing parents to send their kids to private schools is really the answer. Why? Why do we think that's going to work? Have we seen it work elsewhere? No. And what do we think is different here in Louisiana that it will work for us? Those are the kinds of conversations that we should be having, because to your point, this vast divide people seem to believe exists between New Orleans and the rest of Louisiana, or even rural parts of Louisiana versus the cities like Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and Lake Charles. It's probably not as vast of a divide as people really think.
And that's what makes these pushbacks that are happening so interesting.
Yes.
Right? That it's not, you're realizing the smaller towns actually, no, this is also going to affect us negatively.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is why we need to keep public records open so that we know these things are happening.
What goes into those decisions.
Everything's interconnected, my friends.
So what's our Pelican point for population decline?
One. All right, so our Pelican point. So Louisiana's been losing population decline, a brain drain. A lot of this goes back to, at the end of the day, people move, we call push and pull factors.
Yes.
Right? Pull factors, a push factor is you're moving not necessarily on your own accord, warfare, famine. Pull is you're being drawn, and a lot of that draw is economic opportunity, jobs, good jobs, houses, etc. We're lacking all of that.
Yeah.
And we're not passing bills to rectify those problems. And we're passing bills that are, part of the national current debates that have become infiltrated to the state level. That when you actually talk to people, that's not their priority. They want lower insurance. They're not worried about pronouns in books.
Yeah.
We think there are, but they're not.
Yeah.
Right? We need to create policies that keep people in this state, that keep Louisiana competitive. And I think we're at a really critical juncture right now, right, in terms of how the legislative session is impacting people's choice to stay in Louisiana or leave.
Agreed.
Would you add anything to that in terms of the population decline?
I would say this. I still believe in Louisiana. I'm
I
always going to believe in Louisiana. I have concerns about the focus of our legislation right now, and if they're really focused on the right things that are going to turn around our population decline. My hope is that we can, and I still believe that we will. So I think on a hopeful note is where we'll wrap it up. This was a good one.
This is a good one.
Looking forward to next time.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Pelican Briefs.
If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
If you are loving the show, you can help us keep the conversation going by supporting us on Patreon.
Your contribution on Patreon ensures we can continue producing quality content you love.
Click the link in the description to become a patron today.
Until next time, this is Pelican Briefs.